So, gentlemen, we are delighted to have you joining us here today to talk about all things Jordan. And folks, let me remind you out there, drop your questions into the Q&A box and we'll get to them right around 10:40 or so. And looking forward to a great talk. Over to the two of you.
Thank you, Sandy. And it's good to be here with my friend Todd and with the folks in Santa Fe and the area. So I will just begin with a few remarks and then Todd can take it from there. And so in the last 5-6 days, of course, Jordan has dominated regional and international news about this squabble between the king and his half-brother, the former Crown Prince of Jordan, Hamza. And King Abdullah and Hamza are both children, sons of the late King Hussein from different mothers. One is a Britisher mother and one is an American mother. So Abdullah is the son of the British wife and Hamza is the son of the American wife, as you see on the map, you see. So King Abdullah is the son of Princess Muna and former Crown Prince Hamza is the son of Queen Noor, who has resided in recent years mostly in Georgetown in Washington, but of course in other places as well. She is a former Lisa Halaby. Her father was the Secretary of Transportation in the Kennedy administration, and he was the one who helped build Dulles Airport. So this, I call it, Sandy called it probably the Game of Thrones, the title. I think of it potentially, if this continues in Jordan, as the House of Cards, really. Now, why is this so important? And what is this conflict? About 5-6 days ago, the palace, especially the security services who are extremely loyal to King Abdullah, accused Hamza indirectly and his coterie of aides, senior aides around him directly, of plotting against the palace. Oh, they use different words. They said that they are basically undermining the kingdom and the stability of the kingdom and so on. They arrested most of them and they basically put Hamza under house arrest without using those words, but basically told him to stop any contacts with outside, with either his associates or outside people. Well, in reaction to that, Hamza issued 2 videos, one on BBC, both of them, one audio and one video on BBC, basically denouncing the action and basically denying any acts against the state, but emphasizing the fact that Jordan now is slowly but surely becoming almost an autocratic state, that benign monarchy is now slowly moving toward more restrictions of freedom of speech, that anyone who criticizes the king becomes almost terrorist in the eyes of the law, that now any criticism of the king, as in fact in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, becomes a violation of the Terrorism Act, Anti-Terrorism Act. So he spoke out, and the situation was really precarious. In fact, the late King Hussein wrote a book called Uneasy Lies the Head, which is a kind of Shakespearean title, right? And then I would say now, if one is going to write a new book, would be Precarious Lies the Head. And King Abdullah's rule, in the long run, in my judgment, is much more precarious than King Hussein, because King Hussein had the tremendous acumen, political acumen, to create alliances to stay in power, both domestically with the tribes of the East Bank, the strong tribes in Jordan, and internationally with the United States especially, and with Great Britain. And so this conflict then really tore the palace apart. And in fact, when King Abdullah issued that statement, he said he was feeling shock, pain, and anger. And you know why? Not because of the dispute, but because the dispute was spearheaded by as he said, a member of our household, which is his half brother, and by other senior people against the monarchy. I don't know, honestly, we don't have enough information to even verify these accusations. But then 2 days later, they called on Prince Hassan, who is the oldest member of the ruling family in Jordan, of the Hashemites. Prince Hassan is the brother of the late King Hussein, and he was for almost decades the crown prince, until King Hussein removed him from that title, took that title away just weeks before his death, when he was in a hospital in the United States. And he removed his brother, which created a lot of bitterness in Jordan, removed his brother, Prince Hassan, from being a crown prince, and gave that title to, the future king gave that title to Abdullah. But because Abdullah is the son of Princess Muna, the Britisher, and because Queen Noor was King Hussein's, by all indications, most beloved wife, to appease her, he made her son Hamza the crown prince. So he made King Abdullah, the son of Muna, the king, and designated him, and then designated Hamza, Queen Noor's son, as the crown prince. Well, because he thought he would have liked, frankly, to have Hamza become the king, but he was too young at the time, right? That was right in almost 1999, give or take few months. And then a few years later, after King Abdullah became king, few years later, he removed his half-brother from the crown princeship, if you will, and appointed his own son, Hussein, as the crown prince. So that is kind of the context. And then so they called on Prince Hassan to create reconciliation, and Hassan contacted Abdullah, he's being the elder of the family, and Hamza. And then that same evening, Hamza issued a statement declaring his fealty to the king, and he was not really trying to undermine the king or the monarchy or the state of Jordan. And then Abdullah issued another statement later. He did not really exonerate his half-brother, and he told the Jordanian public how sad he was that this conflict occurred. So this has long, term implications for what happened this conflict in Jordan, because Jordan's economy is in dire straits. Jordan is a rent state, what we call a rent state in political science, that it relies on one source of income, primarily foreign aid. So it's a poor country. The economy is in dire straits. Corruption is rife, unfortunately, not unlike many states in the Middle East. And so then domestically, the alliance that the late King Hussein created with the tribes, the strong, especially the Majali tribe in the East Bank, which allowed him to stay in power, now has frayed, because it's Hamza rather than Abdullah who has re-established that connection with the Majali tribes and other tribes in the East Bank. You know, just as an aside, Hamza speaks Arabic very, very well, even though he was educated at Georgetown and at Harvard and at Sandhurst in the UK. Whereas Abdullah's Arabic, when he started, he could not really put a speech in Arabic together without the aid and support of his aides, you see. So the use of Arabic allowed Hamza to connect with the tribes much more than Abdullah could. And the other thing, really, I just don't want to spend time on it, is that Abdullah's wife is of Palestinian origin. And so that whole Palestinian question is almost a red herring for the East Bank tribes. So that's where we are. Of course, Jordan, even though it's small, it is of strategic importance to the United States. It borders on Iraq and Syria, two very unstable states. It has thousands, hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees. And it has connection, although over the years has been pretty shaky with the Al Saud in Saudi Arabia. So stability in Jordan is important to the region and to the international community, particularly the United States and Great Britain. So that's where we are now. I will stop here and then we'll come back to further points after Todd speaks. Todd, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Emile. And I hope, hi everybody. I hope that if you've heard from Emile before, that you know that all we got was a few precious drops of his infinite wisdom on these issues. So think of really good hard questions for him, especially on this Game of Thrones stuff. Now, I'm here in the early evening in Switzerland, saying hello to everyone. But right now, I happen to be residing in Amman, Jordan. So all of this has really been striking home, and of course, I've been paying close attention. So maybe what I could do is add a little bit of local color to what Emile said, and then throw out just sort of a bullet point form why this matters. Actually, let me start there. It's kind of funny. It's not quite it's a coincidence, but in the last few weeks, we've had not just one but two royal scandals to come forward and entertain us. The Harry Meghan House of Windsor show with Oprah there was quite a thing. But there's a fundamental difference, and I think that's where trying to follow who's related to who and all the backstory and how many turtles down do you want to go really is different from the UK stuff, because in the Middle East and in Jordan, like all other countries that have monarchies matter. It's not, we're not talking about celebrity or identity problems. We are actually talking about the wielding of power. And because of Jordan's strategic importance, it matters to everyone else in the Middle East, and it matters enormously to the United States. But before I get onto that, I thought let me make a couple of connections, because Jordan is a small country. I mean, this idea of strategic position, you got to think about it. I was down in the Jordan Valley last week. I was at the Israeli border in less time than it takes to drive to Albuquerque. And a month ago, I was up at a place called Azraq up in the north, and all we had to do was pop on the road, and we would be from Amman to the Syrian border in less time than it takes to get to Colorado from Santa Fe. So this is really close-in stuff. Jordan is a place that everybody tends to take for granted. You don't really think about it much, a small country, poor country, but actually very, very, very important. And it may have come to your attention. There's any number of cultural references I can put out there. But if you're interested in learning more about these dynamics and about King Abdullah and where he sits and what he thinks, there is an incredible interview in the April 2013 issue of the Atlantic magazine. And that was conducted by Jeff Goldberg, who is currently their editor-in-chief, who was at the time Middle East correspondent. And King Abdullah gave him tons of time, flew him around in his helicopter, and most importantly, really let his hair down. And that interview created enormous controversy as soon as it came out. But it really is, Jeff Goldberg, I think, is one of the most outstanding interviewers out there. And he really got to the heart of the matter with King Abdullah letting his hair down. But a couple of other things to relate to is maybe you've seen that movie, that Ridley Scott movie, Body of Lies, with Leonardo DiCaprio, which is about an event that actually took place, a real event, in 2009, when a Jordanian, the doctor by the name of Balawi, was detected communicating, being online extremism. The Jordanian intelligence service, in association with the CIA, then recruited him and infiltrated him into Al-Qaeda. So he was extremely important. And they inserted him up into the Afpak border, Balawi. I was in Afghanistan at the time. And then before he was intended to start setting up raids on Al-Qaeda's high command. These were the highest indications of penetrations into Al-Qaeda since 9/11. They brought him back into the CIA base at a place called Khost on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, they brought him up to the base, all these CIA agents. I mean, there's some real questions about the security of how this was handled. Were lined up, and Balawi got out of the vehicle while they were all waiting, and he blew himself up. He was a double agent. Well, the reason that this connects to the Game of Thrones is that Balawi's Jordanian handler, Jordanian intelligence service handler, was a guy named Bin Zain. His brother was one of the people just arrested in this event that just took place. So that gives you a sense that that sort of the Game of Thrones and House of Cards are deeply, deeply intertwined with the United States. Intelligence cooperation, especially on counterterrorism, is deeply involved. But there are also several bases, Jordanian American bases, including a very important American air base up in the north. You know, it's like if you're in an F-16, you're over the border when you take off, basically. So there are a number of critical sort of strategic platform issues that are resources that are not as well known as the air base in Qatar or the naval base in Bahrain, but are a critical part of U.S. security relations, in the security presence in the region. Jordan has also been playing a very quiet role as an intermediary with Russia in Syria. But they're doing it also on their own because, as a result of the Syrian civil war, and some would argue the failure of the United States to become involved in Syria, Russians' re-entry into the Middle East, into Middle Eastern geopolitics for the first time since 1973. Russia is a reality in the Middle East now. Jordan is also in the middle of it because they share the longest border. Israel's longest border is with Jordan. And so stable relationships between Israel and Jordan are absolutely essential, not just to Middle East peace, but to Israeli security. In that regard, Jordan per capita is the largest host of refugees in the world, really, per capita. And that includes over 500,000 Syrians, but also a majority of Palestinian refugees who are longtime, they're now in the third generation, longtime residents. And of course, they are supported, they had been until the Trump administration, largely supported by US aid. And it's very interesting that Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, who cares deeply about humanitarian issues and has long experience in the Middle East, Tony Blinken, in the last couple of weeks, has made two important humanitarian announcements. So nothing particularly critical on Middle East policy or Middle East peace. I don't think the US is quite there yet. They're waiting for things to ripen. But he announced that the United States would be giving $600 million to support Syrian refugees. A very high portion of that money will be spent in Jordan. And then he just did the same thing regarding Palestinians. You may recall that Trump cut aid to UNRWA, the UN organization that supports Palestinian refugees, that happens to be the oldest of the UN specialized agencies, going all the way back to 1948. Consistent US funding up until the Trump administration, and that's now been restored. And that's just a sense of the importance of Jordan. After Biden's election, there was a very intense round, quite interesting round of diplomatic meetings of leaders, Middle Eastern leaders, sending foreign ministers to Amman, or Amman sending its foreign minister. So the Egyptians, the Saudis, the UAE, King Abdullah himself just visited in March, took his son with him. And that has a reflection on this latest business with Hamza, because of the accusation that came in association with Hamza possibly plotting against his half-brother's regime, that there was foreign interference. And there is no concrete information whatsoever to substantiate that. But the sort of, I guess I'd say, the rumor mill immediately pointed the finger at MBS in Saudi Arabia as possibly meddling in this, which would be true to form for his performance so far. What followed immediately after the eruption of the Game of Thrones, House of Cards scandal was very, very strong expressions of support from all of the regional regimes, from Saudi Arabia, from the UAE, from Egypt, from Israel. Kind of a little funny because Netanyahu, in his own way, has not been very nice to Jordan. We can talk about a little bit more about that if you're interested. But it was Benny Gantz, sort of Netanyahu's rival and defense minister, who gave the statement of support. And then, most importantly, on, I believe it was Wednesday, President Biden called Abdullah, and the White House immediately put out a report giving full United States support for King Abdullah. And very pointedly in the release, Biden gave his support, full support, for the two-state solution in Middle East peace between Israel and the Palestine, the first truly substantive policy statement we've had on that issue since Biden was elected. So I think, you know, I'm gonna stop here with one more comment, which is that Emile's point about Jordan being in dire political and economic straits is absolutely on the point. I mean, living in Amman, you get the sense that people are very conscious of the fact that Jordan has been a moderate and stable state. They value that. But at the same time, you get a constant sense of simmering, that there are things under the surface that are present. And that even though you live in an atmosphere of moderation and even benign monarchy, this is really a police state, and that is the other key column of power. There are no institutions of accountability. Rule of law is questionable. The bureaucracy of the state is reasonably competent, but it's poor, it's very poor. And that leaves you with what? The security institutions to back it up. And I'll just stop there. And I think we probably have some questions. Maybe Emile wants to add something.
Yeah. Todd, that was very, very informative presentation of what happens first within Jordan and the regional relations. And I mean, I have dealt over the years when I was in the government with the monarchy and their security services. Of course, I cannot talk about most of these issues that we discussed, but the two issues that have come to the fore recently, and Todd alluded to one of them, and that is the relations with Netanyahu. And the two issues that I think we should also put in context, and that is the relationship with Israel, and which has soured since the normalization agreement with Abu Dhabi and Bahrain and the other Gulf Emirates, because that normalization agreement did not really discuss either the Palestinians or Jordan's official role as a guardian of Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. And that's very interesting because when you consider that Jordan and Egypt are the only two states in the region that have peace agreements, peace treaties with Israel. I mean, these normalization agreements are not really peace agreements, but that Jordan is the state that followed Egypt in signing a peace agreement with Israel. And so I think the Jordanian monarchy got a bit miffed, rightly so, especially when a visit by the king's now Crown Prince Hussein was supposed to occur. He was supposed to visit Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and the Israelis objected to the size of his security coterie, if you will, and they disagreed with whether to keep the Al-Aqsa Mosque closed or open to worshippers from Jerusalem. And so there was this agreement over that, and the whole visit was canceled. But the other thing that really I think it's very important to keep in mind, this strange, distrustful relationship with the Saudis, which goes back all the way to the 50s. And of course, before that, you know, in the early 50s, when Abdullah became king of Jordan, and when Jordan had control over the West Bank, Jordan was given the role, officially and unofficially, internationally and regionally, of being the guardian of the future, of the status and future situation in Jerusalem, especially on the Haram Sharif or Temple Mount or Al-Aqsa Mosque. You know, Temple Mount and Haram Sharif are exactly the same area. And that any future discussions over the sovereignty or status, political resolution of the conflict over the Haram Sharif was going to involve Jordan. With this new normalization agreement, Saudi Arabia, it seems from Jordan's perspective, is trying to take over that role. And what adds insult to injury is that Hamza's top aide, Bassem Awadallah, who was also arrested in the beginning and questioned, he recently was a special assistant to MBS. And there was a report last night, even though Jordan denied it, that Awadallah left the country. So I assume he must have gone to Saudi Arabia. So it's very interesting to keep that in mind as you develop, as you want to analyze the relationship between the Hashemites and the Al Saud. The Hashemites rightly trace their family to Hashim, who was the prophet's uncle, Muhammad's uncle. And so the family traces its roots to Hashim, so they have real religious legitimacy when they talk about Islam. The Saudis, the Al Saud, are basically newcomers to that completely. And so that's another source of the conflict. I just wanted to add that to the context that Todd presented. And just the final point is that the United States really views the King of Jordan from the day of King Hussein. And you know, Abdullah is only the third king of Jordan. Since Jordan became independent as a monarchy, it was Abdullah, the first king, and then Hussein, his grandson, the second king, and then Abdullah now the second is the third king. So in the last 70 years or so, Jordan has had really three kings. And there were disputes and machinations against King Hussein, both from within the palace and outside, but King Hussein was able to manage all of those. And the threats he faced were much more serious than the threats that Abdullah is facing today. There were the Palestinians, there were PLO, the terrorists, and so on, and threats from neighboring states, but he survived. King Hussein did. Now, I'm not really sure whether Abdullah has the wherewithal and the capabilities domestically and regionally to withstand these pressures if they continue to mount. And I will stop here, open the floor probably for to questions and answers.
So Emile, let me ask you a question. Abdullah has presented himself as a very Western oriented, which he is by birth and upbringing, but not just as an absolute monarch, but as a reformist, a political and economic reformist. And my impression is that is authentic, and he has actually tried to introduce reforms, and has been stymied at every turn. Is that accurate, or would you?
Yeah, it's very interesting. That's a very important point. I'm glad you raised it, Todd. When my senior leadership analyst looked at the three young leaders that took office in the late 90s, Abdullah of Jordan and Bashar al-Assad of Syria and Mohammed of Morocco, and they thought, I mean, my senior leadership analyst thought and actually briefed that Abdullah promises to be the best reformist potentially, right? Of course, followed immediately by Bashar al-Assad. Look what happened to Syria, right? Well, but what is sad about Jordan is that Abdullah had the opportunity to become more of a political reformist, but what we have seen is that democracy and reform, political reform in Jordan, retarded almost, regressed under Abdullah as compared to under Hussein. I mean, Hussein allowed even the Islamic Party to run for parliament. And those alliances he established within the Jordanian parliament, which reflected some sort of democracy, helped him govern. Abdullah has moved the state, for whatever reason, toward more autocracy rather than a benign monarchy, as was the case under Hussein. And that's a troubling sign, at a time when social media and is so exploding in that region and in Jordan in particular, when unemployment is high and underemployment is equally high, when almost between the age of 19 to 29, the official rate might be close to 25% unemployment, but the real rate is probably close to 40%. So unemployment is a serious issue in Jordan, and foreign aid becomes critical, yet we see a move away from democracy. So that reform that Abdullah promised when he came to power has really moved south. One time somebody was asking Abdullah after he became king whether he liked being a king of Jordan. He said he loved being a king, but he would prefer to be a king of Switzerland. And so, or Belgium, or Liechtenstein in Europe. I mean, he loved the idea of being a king, but not necessarily of Jordan. And the reason, and I met him right after he became king, he could not connect even in the language. His Arabic was flawed, understandably. He grew up in England almost. And he, with these tribes, you cannot expect a translator, interpreter to create an atmosphere of closeness unless you speak their language and their accent and their idioms and their symbols. And so language was a big hindrance in his initial year, and he wasn't even comfortable donning the official military suit that his father, King Hussein, used to readily. Where now he does that in cases of emergency, but it was very difficult for him to connect with Jordan, really, other than that crust, the elite that lived on the sixth circle and the fifth circle in Amman. So that is a situation that he faced in Jordan. He overcame that, except he moved toward more autocracy and security state rather than benign monarchy. I mean, that's kind of a quick analysis, I think, of what has happened to that promise of reform that we all really placed in Abdullah when he became king.
Yeah, and if anybody's questioning about how important Jordan is to the U.S. in all of this, another story that Abdullah tells is that when he found out that he'd been named Crown Prince, he was in a training course in Monterey, California at the Defense Language Institute. But go look at the budget numbers. In terms of U.S. aid, Afghanistan, #1, Israel, #2, and that's for it's not like Israel needs American assistance. And #3 is Jordan. So do we have questions, Sandy?
Yeah, sure. Let's jump into some questions. Emile, you were just talking about social media. I remember reading something about Saudi Arabia recently that something like 8 out of 10 adults have a Twitter account. And so Herb Thomas asked the question here, reflecting on David Ignatius's article from a few days ago, that Middle Eastern monarchs are all freaked out by social media undermining their regimes. Of course, there's the potential or actual disinformation, and then there's also just the full flow of information and open information. Can you talk a little bit more, and Emile, start with you, about that role of social media in governance?
Yeah, actually, social media in the Middle East became prominent really in terms of the youth using social media. It started in 2009 with the Iranian uprising, if you will. And when you looked at an analysis of Iranian youth use of social media, per capita was one of the highest in the world. And that, of course, has moved to Arab countries. You have the internet, and then you have WhatsApp and other means. But the problem is it has generated a tremendous fear almost among ruling elites, but also has given them more methods, technology, with even artificial intelligence to use to control that social media. So they quickly, for instance, can shut down Twitter. They can shut down and trace dissidents. Today in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in Jordan, if you write one tweet critical of the ruler, within minutes you can be arrested, which means that the state controls social media pretty well. And in fact, countries like Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the UAE have bought Israeli technology in the area of artificial intelligence and tracking, not to develop their economies, but basically to track their own populations. So social media is a two-edged sword in the Middle East. One, it empowers the youth to connect with each other and to connect with their counterparts worldwide. And at the same time, it's a tool that the state now has to control its own population, especially under these new so-called terrorism laws. Saudi Arabia started that law, Bahrain has that law, Egypt has that law, Jordan has that law. So any criticism immediately can put you where you can be charged with an anti-terrorism almost indictment against the regime.
And then there was that great piece again covering Saudi Arabia, and they were using bees, and I forget something else, some other metaphor, for the amount of disinformation on social media perpetuated by the government. So you may well post whatever you want to post, and then suddenly you're attacked by thousands of accounts that are ultimately all linked back to the state, further frustrating or complicating or confusing dialogue on anything in the social media sphere.
And that's a very important point, because the bots, Saudi Arabia has developed tremendous expertise thanks to Israeli technology with these bots to follow their dissidents, not only at home, but in the US and Canada and elsewhere too, and in Europe as well. So social media has become really a very nasty and nefarious tool in the hands of some regimes, not only to spread fake news, if you will, and conspiracy theories against dissidents, but also to track those dissidents.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about international relations of Jordan in the Middle East. There's a question here from Shelley Cooper saying, why does Netanyahu not fully support King Abdullah? And I'd love to talk about Lebanon a little bit too, but Todd, why don't I pitch this to you? What's going on between Israel and Jordan, and why is there not sort of fuller levels of support given what's happened in the kind of cooling of relations with Israel?
Well, there's a lot to unpack with that question, but I think to put a basic blot on it, that Netanyahu, I mean, that's sort of in some ways Israeli politics in the same way that American politics became so much about Donald Trump. Israeli politics has become so much about Benjamin Netanyahu that Israel is in a pretty comfortable place. I mean, I think that they believe they are in a comfortable place, right? You can't generalize everybody, but that they got what they wanted out of their own version of the security state, which is that the Palestinians are fractured. They do not have an enormous amount of independent leverage. And as long as they have this security apparatus that allows them to control, why do they need a Middle East peace agreement? I mean, from an outsider's point of view, it's like, are you nuts? Don't you want some kind of normal state of peace that has some semblance of stability and perpetuity? But I think from Netanyahu's point of view in particular, that's not correct. That the more that a security-oriented, right-leaning Israeli populist base is out there, the more he can maintain his own hold on policy. So he's expressed that in part through his relations rather than respecting his relations with Jordan and the importance of that peace agreement and the importance of the fact that Jordan is the host of so many Palestinians, people with legitimate claims who were expelled from Israel. He's kind of put the stick in their eye, doing things like the Al-Aqsa Mosque was, you know, that's a very dangerous place, and there are historical reasons why Jordanian royalty is very nervous about visiting there, even though they're the protectors, they're the guardians of it. But he also has been holding up a critical water agreement for Jordan for no particular, you know, there's no reason to be doing that. It's a water agreement they have, but he's been holding that up. So it's also, I think, a manifestation, if you're thinking of sort of his Donald Trump-like aspects, it's a very negative view of how you deal with your neighbors.
So we've got 3 more questions here in the Q&A, and I'd love to get to them all before we wrap up in about 10 minutes. Emile, question for you from Barbara Chatterjee. Can you describe a little bit more what Prince Hamza is like and what he's been up to in recent years? And can you describe the young Crown Prince Hussein?
Yeah, it's very interesting. First, Hussein was plugged by his father to be the Crown Prince, and what angered Hamza recently, I think, among other things, was that Abdullah has been promoting Hussein. Like on his visit to the Gulf, he took Hussein with him. He is basically like Abdullah is almost 60 years old, 59 or something. And he is really, from Hamza's perspective, he is really making sure that Hussein become the king. And so he's given him military titles and military ranks and so on. Many of these military ranks, unlike this country, do not occur as a result of experience in the field, but they are like a gift bestowed by the monarch. And so they've given them both high military ranks. Now, Hamza has been, some have accused him of being a playboy and like many rich young males in the Middle East. But what is interesting, and I think that's what upset the palace more than anything else, especially the intelligence agencies about Hamza, is that he has slowly but surely he has begun to cultivate relations with the East Bank tribes. I think people in the West, in this country and other countries, do not focus much on the role of these tribes. I mean, you know, when we look at tribes in Israel, we think of the Bedouins in the Negev. Well, they are not really a powerful element. In Jordan, they have been the backbone of the monarchy since King Hussein's days. And because Abdullah has not been able to create close relationships, really, there is the fealty relationship that they all declare allegiance or bay'ah to the king, but that Hamza has almost become more mature in recent years in developing almost a political future. And in my judgment, this is the reason, I think, or one of the main reasons that the palace turned against him. So they have watched him develop these relations with not only the Majali tribe, which is one of the largest, most influential tribe in the East Bank, but other tribes as well. And he looks like his father. He creates that image. He now sporting a mustache like his father. He is a miniature version of his father. He dresses like his father in his military uniform, I mean, civilian with a tie, yet he has the head dress, which really, for the tribes, they see Hussein in miniature. And that has really disturbed the palace much more than they care to admit. And also, one final point, they see through this Hussein's growing influence, they see the hand of his mother, Queen Noor. Because Queen Noor was the one who issued the tweet that her son was under house arrest. That's how the world really knew about that situation. And so they see that influence through Queen Noor, which of course displeases the present Queen of Jordan and certainly the palace.
So question here, Todd, I'm going to throw to you. This is from Mike Pratt. And I don't know anything about this question, and I hope you do. And the question is, do you have any thoughts about how the Jordanian State Security Court impacts Jordanian society in general and the role it might play with regard to the recent destabilization plot?
Well, I think that most importantly ties back to the issue of using having a counterterrorism law that's sort of a blanket. I mean, if you think about the extremes that the Bush administration went to in its very early days after 9/11, and try to put yourself in that mind frame, but then make that terrorism problem domestic. You know, I know we've tried to stir that up in the US about right-wing terrorism, but that doesn't really carry quite the same impact of having terrorism within your own house. So Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the founder of ISIS, was a Jordanian from a city called Zarqa. This is the same city where the Dr. Bolawi, who I mentioned earlier, came from. So the Jordanian security services have grown very, very mature, and of course in close collaboration with the United States in dealing with counterterrorism. Now, take that counterterrorism and transfer it to the police state. In other words, to make them the guardians of the state and of the monarchy. Think about how that works. So the court fits into that in the sense that you're talking about laws, so they exist, but all laws stem ultimately from the king. You have a very elaborate court system, but if you have a state security court that's focused on those issues, then what really is what we think of as rule of law, as something independent, doesn't really exist. So that's when we're starting to talk about drift toward authoritarianism and potential instability, that you would expect to see the role that court take on a role. And one of the questions will be whether they, to what degree are their procedures in secret, and to what degree do they allow information to emerge from that?
So, Emile, last question goes to you, and Todd, by all means, feel free to chip in from Virginia McCallum. I think it's a great way to close this. Does it seem likely that the government might fall? Is this the sign of massive instability, or is this just another sort of piece of palace intrigue that will go away and be replaced by the next piece of palace intrigue?
That's a very good question. The only caveat I would put about Jordan, governments have fallen in Jordan frequently, and the king has used government almost as a scapegoat. So the question is, you probably mean, will the monarchy fall? I mean, the government might fall, and that might be a way by Abdullah to placate Jordan, say, okay, well, the government was not really on guard when these things happen. So he would ask the prime minister to dissolve the government and then form a new government. So that is a possibility, right? But the question is, if it implies a monarchy, no, I don't think the monarchy will fall. I don't expect the monarchy will fall over the next, because of my intelligence background, I would say the next 3 to 5 years. I don't think the monarchy will fall in the next 3 years.
So I'll just add to that, and I promise I had nothing to do with this latest business, even though I was living in Amman. I've been through any number of civil wars and coups and this sort of thing in my career, and there's a critical element of this. Everybody agrees with what Hamza said. The country is in dire straits. It has not been made. It has not been able to make very much progress politically or economically. But then turn it back and say, yeah, and the king has not been served very well by his own political class. I mean, the accusations of corruption, who is to be accused of that if it's not, if it's not the political leadership, including some of the people that Hamza is cultivating. More importantly, though, let's say, just to take a counterfactual to illustrate, let's say that Hamza had issued his statement after being warned by the chief of staff of the army to keep quiet. He got onto BBC and issued this video. Let's say that the General Intelligence Directorate had then come out and said, yes, and Hamza is right. That would have painted an entirely different picture about the security of the state, but they didn't. So for the time being, right now, not only does Abdullah have very strong support of his important international partners, the security apparatus, the army, and the intelligence directorate are firmly behind him as well.
Well, gentlemen, what a great pleasure it is to have you both on screen and sharing your valuable wisdom on all things Middle East. We are tremendously lucky to have both of you as regulars on our stage. Thank you, Dr. Emile Nakhleh. Thank you, Dr. Todd Greentree. What a pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good, and we'll see you all next week on Wednesday at 10 a.m. when we get into the Secret Service. Looking forward to it. And until then, have yourself a fine weekend, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.